Hello, folks joining us. We'll give it a few minutes or a minute at least, for some more folks to jump in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I guess it's a bit past 1, so I will get started, and I'm sure a few more folks will join in as I go through the welcome and housekeeping. So hello again, everyone, and welcome back to our Ask an Expert webinar series for the 2025 fall season. This is our second last session. So again, my name is Meg, and I'm the International Watershed Coordinator with the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation, and I also work part-time with the International Joint Commission, connecting with partners across the Rainy Lake of the Woods Basin. I'll be your host again today. I'm also joined by Tika Newton, the Executive Director for the Foundation, and our presenter, Doug Jensen, who I will introduce in a moment. I'm joining you all from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, where it's cloudy. It's finally getting a bit chillier. We might even get snow later this week. We'll see. Either way, it's a great day to learn about aquatic invasive species, what's being done, and a story of success. So just briefly, aquatic invasive species, or AIS, are non-native plants, animals, or pathogens that can spread rapidly in freshwater systems. They can outcompete native species, disrupt ecosystems, damage infrastructure, and can create costly long-term impact. So today, Doug will be sharing insights into the challenges of AIS across the border. He'll walk us through how Minnesota has emerged as a North American leader in AIS prevention. Over the past 30 years, the evidence has been clear that prevention is far more cost-effective than management. Minnesota's success comes from combining science-based outreach, watercraft inspection, and decontamination, enforcement, and risk assessment to slow the spread of AIS. Doug will also highlight the move toward more strategic, consistent, and simple messaging that encourages boaters and anglers to adopt AIS prevention behaviors every time they're on the water. The results speak for themselves. Awareness among water users is at an all-time high. Recent analysis from the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center and the Cass County AIS program show that the rate of AIS spread has slowed significantly over the past decade. So thank you, Doug, for being here with us, and thank you all for joining us to hear of how AIS prevention is working in Minnesota and what lessons we can take forward in Lake of the Woods and the rest of our basin. Before we begin, I'll just review a few Zoom housekeeping items. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. It will be available to watch later at our website, along with our previous episodes. If you're new to the series, again, welcome. The series is all about being able to share the science and stewardship happening across the Rainy Lake of the Woods Basin. To keep things running smoothly, everyone will remain muted and cameras off during the presentation. When we get to the discussion portion, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Or at any point, you can type your questions into the chat or Q&A box. I'll circle back to these at the end, and I can ask if you want to ask your questions out loud, or I can read them on your behalf if I don't hear from you. And a friendly reminder that Zoom saves all of the chat messages, including the private ones. So just make sure everything is respectful, as I'm sure it will be. Again, after the presentation, we'll have some time for questions, reflections, and discussions. During our previous sessions, we've had a lot of great discussions, so I encourage everyone to think of a question or something you want to ask. Doug is here to answer and have a chat with anyone who wants. So just a quick introduction of Doug. So Doug Jensen is an aquatic invasive species prevention planner for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources who provides technical support to local governments as they develop, implement, and assess local AIS prevention aid plans and activities within their counties. For over 3 decades, he has used science-based outreach strategies to change people's behavior aimed at preventing AIS spread via his leadership supporting from national to local programs. He has authored dozens of scientific papers and education resources and received dozens of national and regional awards for his work. Regionally, Doug is the Outreach Committee Chair for the Great Lakes Panel on ANS and contributes leadership as a member of the Minnesota Invasive Species Advisory Committee. In November 2026, he will again co-chair the Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference in La Crosse. He also has an MS in education with a program evaluation focus and a BS in biology from the University of Minnesota, Duluth. So with that, I'll hand it off to Doug. I'll stop sharing my screen, Doug, and you can share yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Megan, for that wonderful introduction, and Tika for also inviting me, and thank you for all for coming. It's an honor to be here. I'm very excited to be here. Let's see if I can get the technology to work. There. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, it looks great, and it's on
Great.
present.
Super. Just one small correction. I think I may have supplied the wrong date for the Upper Midwest Invasive Species Conference. It's actually in October, and it's October 6th through the 8th. So mark your calendars. I'll be co-chairing the conference down in La Crosse. Hope to see you there. So again, thank you very much for inviting me today. I've been working on developing conservation programs and campaigns concerning aquatic invasive species, or AIS, for a little more than 30 years now. And finally, we have a compelling story of success on AIS, which I'll be sharing here in just a few minutes. Some of the work that I'll be talking about has been some of my own. Others I've worked in collaboration with others, and also be talking a little bit about some other research has been conducted by other folks, and so kind of pulling all this information together. I've said it before and I'll say it again, everything that we've ever accomplished on aquatic invasive species management has been through collaboration and partnerships. That's been absolutely critical, and I'll talk a little bit about that again towards the end of this presentation. So when it comes to aquatic invasive species, what it really comes down to is managing people. It's about managing the people to then manage the aquatic invasive species, and public awareness and behaviors are keys to preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species. And as you may have heard or know, you can ask about probably any state in the United States who have led AIS outreach and assessment. And I'll say that Minnesota is a recognized leader in AIS research, education, outreach, and assessment for over 3 decades. And it's through these assessments we've learned a great deal about how to tailor and improve AIS outreach aimed at prevention. So for the purposes of this presentation, we will show you the agenda, if it will come through. Try it again. There we go. So for the purpose of this agenda, we'll emphasize that AIS are a major issue here in Minnesota. We'll talk about effective AIS public outreach that can change behaviors. We'll show that evidence of success AIS management that is curbing the spread, and then use the remainder of our time for questions and answers. So, but before we do that, let's take a look at a snapshot of the status of AIS in Minnesota. And what we're seeing here are 3 levels of AIS spread. Those that have not spread range from quagga mussels to VHS, the fish virus, viral hemorrhagic septicemia. Those that are slowly spreading include zebra mussels to starry stonewort, and those that are more widely spread include purple loosestrife to mystery snails. So those that are in red and yellow are not spreading or slowly spreading and are generally based on more recent infestations, while those in green were established before management activities and therefore are more widely spread. And those species are also managed differently by DNR regulations. For example, the 3 purple loosestrife, curly pondweed, and Eurasian water milfoil are prohibited, while rusty crayfish and mystery snails are regulated. Computer beast seems to be slow today. We'll see what happens here. So, a part of this case study, really what's at risk for Minnesota? I would argue that we would be the perfect storm for aquatic invasive species in our state. We have 5.6 million residents. We have 11,842 lakes. That's more than 10,000 than our license plate says. But those are all over 10 acres. We have 183,000 miles of shoreline. We have more shoreline than Florida, California, and Hawaii combined, which is amazing. Um, we have property taxes around 250 billion from shoreline property. We have a vibrant tourism industry, 14.1 billion. Those tourism jobs are strongly supported. There's 273,000 private jobs, 2.4 billion in retail sales related to fishing. We have 825,000 registered boats in Minnesota. We rank third in the nation, just behind Florida and California. We have 1.7 million licensed anglers. Of the people that come into the state of Minnesota, of the 33 million, 31% of them fish, and we have 2,245 public accesses and tens of thousands of private accesses. Again, with all these things at risk, we would be the perfect storm for the potential spread of aquatic invasive species, but we're not. So Minnesota is working to manage about 30 aquatic invasive species to prevent the spread to our vast numbers of lakes and rivers. And this is just a short list that you might be familiar with in terms of invasive invertebrates, plants, fish, and fish diseases. You may recognize that some of these species because they're also some of the AIS that the Lake of the Woods area is also addressing. But there's also many new invasive species that could rise and cause problems. Again, this is just a short list. And knowing what these species are is just to start. Knowing how to deal with them once they're in the pathways for potential introduction and establishment raises both challenges and opportunities in our real world. So what do we know and what can be done? Well, we know that for sure is that research shows that people pose the greatest risk for overland transport of aquatic invasive species. We also know that based on the research that I've been a part of, that I've led or been a part of, or that people will take action if they know what to do. But without proper information, they'll do nothing. If we do nothing, the spread is inevitable. So this is sort of my photo collage of the different pathways for potential spread. And one thing that we've learned over the past 30 years is that to manage aquatic invasive species, we must break down and address each one of the pathways. And so looking at the literature, there's hundreds of studies that are out there that are shown that AIS are spread overland by people. Again, these are the various audiences and pathways that can spread them. And via all these different pathways, everybody is at least at some risk for spread from multiple pathways. And so bringing this to a key point, what we've learned is that combating aquatic invasive species requires addressing each of those pathways in a focused, localized approach. So enter the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign. So the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign was in the United States was launched in 2002. It was launched by the Federal Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, and it's designed to be a social marketing based campaign. It's designed to link tools and barriers to behavior change. It's created a step down so any partner can adapt or adopt the resource materials and join the campaign. We've got over 1,400 partners that have joined from business agencies, academia, and nonprofits. And amazingly, since 2006, the campaign partners have generated over 2 billion impressions. A cornerstone of the campaign are voluntary recreational activity guidelines for 6 recreational activities. Those for recreational boaters are found here. And while the message for the communication media is such as prompts as clean, drain, dry, our outreach messages are very specific to the actions that we desire every boater to take every time and everywhere. So over there on the left, you can see the straightforward communication messages, and there on the right are the education messages and the actions we want boaters to take. So in 2005, 2007, I led a 3-state design, development, and implementation of the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign in Minnesota, and in collaboration with Wisconsin and Iowa, which showed that implementation at state levels was possible. In 2010, on behalf of the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network, led by me, we developed over 143 tools and outreach and communications created over 33 million impressions or exposures to our prevention messages. So this is the first regional survey of North American Fishing Club members that was conducted in collaboration with the North American Media Group and Wildlife Forever, who at the time was Pat Konzemis, and he's now the president and CEO. So our objectives of the survey to measure the effectiveness of the campaign was to determine whether strategic messages using dedicated e-marketing could effectively reach anglers, whether or not it could raise angler awareness, and whether it could result in desired reported behavior change. So all this done was online through 5 e-newsletters. Here's 3 of them from April 30th, May 7th, and June 4th, and each one of them focused on the what's, the where's, the how's, when's, and the who's, the what's, the where's, when's, and how's to take action at water access to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. We use the Dillman method for survey research using survey announcements and then 2 follow-up reminders. So on to the results. We asked what was the importance of taking action to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species, and this is across the entire Great Lakes region. Results compiled across all the states was remarkably consistent at 97%. So we asked a before and after exposure question regarding awareness based on exposure to the newsletters, and what we found was that there was a marked increase from 46% of who were moderately aware before exposure to 96% to moderately aware after exposure, which represents a 50% increase. Then we asked the million-dollar question: what actions will you take, and what actions will you take in the future? Always to usually taking action rose from 64% to 97%, which represents a 33% increase. So we also tested this within a small watershed just north of Duluth, Minnesota, where I'm located. In the area of the White Iron Chain of Lakes Association, we began to integrate stop aquatic hitchhiker prevention into the association's work. We partnered with key agencies and embarked on a 30-month project to extend stop aquatic hitchhikers at meetings, booths, education products, and also at a symposium. And at the end of the 30-month period, I helped develop and administer a mail survey, which is distributed to all households within that watershed. So what we did with the surveys is we made them very comparable. So what's really cool about this is that shown over here on the right-hand side, the KWPP, which is Squishaway Watershed Protection Plan, versus the results of the Great Lakes survey that I led were directly comparable. And what you can see here is what the results of one of the questions that we asked, which was really important: what was the most effective way in reaching them? And you can see that they're very similar, and this makes sense because we have been emphasizing these different methods here in Minnesota. So we're seeing the confluence of these 2 things coming together. We asked what actions they have taken, and good news is that they're largely responding to the actions that we're promoting. You can see over 95% are draining their water, over 90% are inspecting and removing aquatic plants. Disposing of unwanted bait, we could do a little bit better there in terms of our messaging. And then in terms of drying, we expect that folks will, a good portion of them will at least dry their watercraft for at least 5 days. If they're taking these 3 actions from draining, inspecting, and also then drying for at least 5 days, they're almost eliminating their potential overland transport of aquatic invasive species. Not too surprising, rinsing as well as washing was lower in the just south of the Ely area because they're very much more remote than other areas of the Great Lakes, and they just don't have the washing infrastructure there at that time. So we also asked about the motivations, what's motivating them to take actions based on their values and norms. And so here on the left, we can see that the reasons are based on a desire to keep AIS out of our waters, the feeling of personal responsibility, my actions will make a difference, and desire to prevent damage of my boat, motor, and trailer. And you can see they're remarkably similar for the two first categories, but they're also different for the third. And this makes sense because at the time in the Ely area, there was a much fewer aquatic invasive species than what there was across the Great Lakes region and what's in the Great Lakes. So with regard to norms, based on this analysis, AIS outreach should build upon the social norms. What we're seeing is that people are responding to seeing other people take action. They're remarkably similar, around 90%, and also getting information from friends, relatives, and acquaintances are also a very important source for information. So, in terms of the motivations for taking action, again, we're seeing this desire to keep people to keep AIS out of our lakes and rivers. There's that personal responsibility, seeing other people take action, friends and relatives. But there's also the threats of them being fined and costing them money. That the laws or regulations that require actions to prevent the aquatic invasive species are also strong motivators, and also the threats of enforcement of conservation of, or enforcement officers is also another motivator. So taking this and then comparing it to previous surveys that I led in 1994 and 2000, you can see that there's been a great increase in terms of people's motivations. And this is because in 2012, the laws were changed in Minnesota, made much more stronger and fines more heavy. So when it comes to the threats of the fines, the threats to values, the top ones were fines, laws, enforcement, and embarrassment. And results showed increases on the previous surveys by about 25 to about 85%, depending upon the category. So the question really becomes, how high can we really go with this? So when comparing the surveys, again, the threats and fines and regulations and again rose. So this is kind of a summary of what we're talking about in terms of the fines and the threats. So just kind of repeating what I showed in the previous slide. But the good news is that for people not taking action, so for the sake of argument, say 95% of the people are taking action and 5% weren't taking action. So in this case, they're all quite low in terms of the types of reasons why people aren't taking action, that they believe that the current regulations were ineffective, that it's inconvenient, they didn't realize the importance of their actions, the spread was only a matter of time, they forgot, they were physically able, AIS are everywhere anyway, my actions won't help. I believe that it only takes one to cause an infestation. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. And I did not believe that AIS was a problem. I don't care. And then there's just this one jerk here in one of the surveys that said I was just willing to pay the fine. So the good news is that there's a very high motivation and very low reasons why people aren't taking action. So we have additional evidence that supports that direct outreach via meetings and presentations can positively impact awareness and behavior change. And based on work by my Great Lakes Sea Grant colleagues across the Great Lakes region at 11 outreach events, post-event surveys showed that awareness went from 68% before the event to 82% post-event, which was a 26% increase, and that was also statistically significant. And then looking at the behavior before and after, 53% said that they always to usually took action to prevent the spread, and it rose to 92% based on the exposure at the meeting, which was a 39% increase, which was also statistically significant. So kind of shifting gears now, back to Minnesota. Nationally, Minnesota led the first comprehensive program that started in the early 1990s, and the focus has been on policy, public outreach, watercraft inspection, and recently decontamination. Also enforcement, early detection, and risk assessment. Minnesota Outreach has shifted early to more strategic and consistent and simple messaging. We started out using sort of an information deficit model, where if we thought we just provide them the information that they'd automatically take action, but we recognized that wasn't going to be very efficient and wasn't going to work. And then we shifted more towards a community-based social marketing message where we're asking them to take direct actions. So with that shift, that's resulted in a major change in how we approach this. Today, we're the only state in the nation that provides local AIS prevention aid that creates a statewide network for local AIS programs. So in 2014, the Minnesota Department of Revenue was authorized by the Minnesota legislature to dole out $10 million to counties that have public accesses and also trailered parking spots. And so 83 of those counties are receiving AIS prevention aid for the formation of their programs, and those are the programs that I help support. And we kind of consider these all kind of working laboratories. Each one of the counties are somewhat similar, but also quite a bit different in terms of their approaches in their programs. So taking all the surveys that I've been involved with, my first survey, the first one in the United States, most comprehensive survey, and just looking at the data from Minnesota, 70% of the voters said they're willing to take action. It went to 90% in 2000 based on my master's thesis, based on the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers face-to-face survey in 2007 was 97%. And across the board, and even if we extend it out to more recent surveys past 2015, we've all seen over 95% reported behavior change since 1994, which represents a 27% increase, which is pretty remarkable. So we also know that based on the data and research that prevention is more cost effective than management. We have evidence that AIS prevention is working. Since 2015, watercraft inspection data indicate that most people, 95% or more, are following the prevention laws, which is the highest nationally. And analysis that was recently conducted back in February by the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, or MASERC, and also Cass County AIS program with Steve Henry indicate that the rate of AIS spread has slowed in Minnesota over the last decade, and we're also the only state that can claim that. And looking back at this, thinking again, Minnesota is the perfect storm. Here we have all these registered boaters, we've got all these anglers, we've got visitors coming from everywhere across the nation and internationally. We've got all these lakes and we've got all these rivers and all these public accesses. It's pretty remarkable that we're again pretty much the perfect storm for the spread of aquatic invasive species. But what the really the compelling outcome is, whoops, let's go back. Since 2015, boater awareness and behaviors has been very high. Reported compliance and actual compliance has been over 95% across the state of Minnesota, which also is the highest nationally. So nationally, Minnesota is the first state that can really claim that we are curbing the spread of aquatic invasive species. Here's the data from courtesy of Steve Henry. So what Steve did there with the Cass County AIS program is he took the Minnesota DNR's infested waters list and scrubbed it of sightings of aquatic invasive species in adjacent water bodies. So looking at it through a more prevention lens, and you can see that the increase in Minnesota in terms of cumulative infestations continued to increase until 2014. But then they've dropped, and it's continued to drop through last year. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, everything that we've done in Minnesota and elsewhere in terms of aquatic invasive species management has been dependent upon collaboration, and it's been dependent upon regional statewide partnerships by DNR, the counties, MASERC, federal agencies, tribes, lake association, advocacy groups, and people who enjoy Minnesota water resources. They've all contributed to this success. So kind of bringing it all home. Really leadership, a comprehensive program, and a refocus on prevention efforts and data and research have all really kind of come together. For nearly a decade, zebra mussel inland spread was prevented. We'll see if this is going to work. There we go. Outreach, again, from 1994 to 2007 and beyond, recreational boater and angler surveys revealed that awareness and reported prevention actions have increased from 70% to 97%. Respectively, which is a 27% increase. Since 2012, surveys continue to show over 95% reported taking preventative actions. And since 2015, DNR watercraft inspectors have observed statewide greater than 95% compliance at water access, and I've seen many of the reports from the counties that report their accomplishments to us by the end of the year. They're seeing via their inspection programs 98 to 99% compliance. And only, that should be 9%, only 9% of Minnesota water bodies are listed as infested, which has only slightly changed over the last decade. So over the past 10 years, the rate of spread has been dramatically slowed. And statewide collaborations and partnerships are key. So in closing, again, only 9% of our water bodies are infested in the state of Minnesota. We certainly want to keep it that way. And effective management is based on conservation with components of policy, watercraft inspection, decontamination, enforcement, strategic communication, and outreach, early detection, risk assessment, and research. And Minnesota really serves as a model and many other states have incorporated elements from our state into their statewide prevention programs. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd just like to add a little humor here. The sign here says, "Eat here and get worms." So I know that was a lot to take in. Happy to answer any questions if we have time.
Thanks, Doug. That was super informative and a lot of great information in there and a lot to take in, but also clearly there's been a lot of great work being done in Minnesota for prevention and action on AIS, which I think, it's only becoming more critical, especially here in our basin. Um, so with that,
I feel very fortunate to be a Minnesotan and to be in the world of aquatic invasive species and being able to contribute to that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's something that, we're thankful for you for sharing your expertise with us and so we can learn and because the water does not have borders, so this is helpful for us. But I just want to open the floor for anyone in the audience if you have any questions or want to also introduce yourself, whatever, to yeah, feel free to type in the chat or Q&A and I can unmute you or raise your hand. Tika, your hand is raised. I think you can unmute yourself.
I can unmute
Yeah.
myself. Thanks, Meg. Um, Doug, I'd be curious to know, like, what is your plan going forward? What's your top priority for the next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of research, what I would like to see done, and this wouldn't be necessarily something that I would take a lead on, but I could help support, is we need to really do more research on the motivations for those people that aren't taking action. We know that the spread is still happening in Minnesota, and so each water body that becomes infested, may seem like it is a failure, but nothing's perfect. But if we can sort of move the needle of the segments of audience that's not taking action and resulting in those infestations, maybe we can, you know, sort of close the door on that particular audience. So when I think of boaters and anglers, just for example, we've been talking about that during this entire presentation, but there's other audiences as well, including aquarists and water gardeners, which is going to be another focus of our work and is ongoing. I'm thinking of the doers. So we know that a greatest segment of the audience out there, say 95 to 97%, whatever it is, um, we want to continue to reinforce them so that they continue to take action, that they continue to recognize AIS as a significant issue to the environment, to recreation, and also the economy, and to communities that depend upon healthy lakes for jobs. And so in doing that, the second audience is then those that aren't always taking action. And if we can understand the motivations for people why they aren't always taking action and move that needle again more positively, and those that aren't taking action is the third audience. So if we can continue to support those three different audiences and understand their motivations, and then do some targeted messaging for those audiences that aren't always taking actions or don't take action, and see what messages really resonate with them. I think that's a really important area for research. Another area that I did mention now is water gardeners and aquarists. We've known for quite some time, since around 2000. I helped start the Habitatitude national campaign here in the United States in collaboration with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council. And through that partnership, we did a lot of really great things. I mean, the industry donated $1.1 million to help support a grant that I received from NOAA to launch the campaign. And that began our first foray into reaching out to what we're calling OIT audiences. We continued that with Great Lakes restoration funding in the Great Lakes region till about 2018, and then we ran out of funding. And so there's the Great Lakes panel, who I'm the chair of the outreach committee. The Great Lakes panel began to address organisms in trade around 2017 and formed a committee in 2021 to coordinate activities across the Great Lakes region. What we're hoping to do eventually is to have an OIT regional coordinator so we can then coordinate our activities around OIT, around bait, around live seafood trade, biological supply houses, and also water gardeners and aquarius. And through that, hopefully, we can continue to shut down the pathways of aquatic invasive species through those pathways. There's also another area which we certainly need to do more with, and about 15 years ago, we identified fishing tournaments as a major pathway. And we launched what was called Clean Boats, Clean Tournaments, which was led by Wisconsin Sea Grant. And we're having discussions now in Minnesota about trying to resurrect that program in collaboration with the DNR to reach out to different tournaments. Each year in Minnesota, there's about 400 tournaments. And if they're not taking action, they could be spreading aquatic invasive species.
Super interesting, Doug. Thanks for all that.
Mhm.
As I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking about um, types of work that I've done in the past that have focused on advocacy campaigns that where you're trying to compel people toward
Mhm.
more positive behaviors. And a lot of the research that I'm familiar with, talks about in groups and how you make social change, how you shift social norms. And that's got me wondering if in the work that you're doing, are you seeing that those social norms around stewardship of waters and like just how we engage with the natural world, are those shifting? Do you find that they're
Yes,
changing? Yeah.
yes, they are shifting. I'm definitely witnessed it, both in the data that I've collected and we talked about here today, but also anecdotally. Just for example, I passed through a water access earlier this summer, and there was a CD3 station, a waterless cleaning station that was there, and I pulled in, and there were two young men, and they had pulled up their boat right to the CD3 station, and they were cleaning off their boat motor and trailer, and there was nobody there to direct them. So we're definitely seeing that develop as both personal as well as social norms. Maybe I could say a little bit more about tools at water accesses. So what I didn't talk about today was, well, I did touch on it briefly. Why people aren't taking action is because there's not tools that are available. So say for the sake of argument that 95% of the people are taking action and 5% aren't taking action. Of that 5%, between 15 and 22%, based on my survey data, aren't taking action because there's not tools. Well, CD3 came around in 2017 here in Minnesota, and now we have CD3 stations scattered across the state, and they have the tools that are tethered. They know which tools are being used most frequently, how long they're using it, what time of day they're using it, and so that allows them to then tailor the stations to be in the most effective position to provide the right tools at the right place at the right time. In addition to that, there's been a movement to try to find ways to provide tools that are much cheaper than that. And so Minnesota DNR helped produce a sign which has holes that you can put hooks on, and then tools can be attached to the sign and installed at public water accesses across the state. Just as an example, Cass County is in the process of installing 100 of those types of tools at their water access just in their county alone. So they have no excuses anymore. They have the tools. They have the awareness. It's coming together.
Thanks for these questions, Tika, and for the answers, Doug. That was something on my mind too. The previous session that we had was with DFO and Ground Council Treaty 3 talking about some of the decontamination practices that they're leading around northwestern Ontario, and some of them are with a mobile decontamination
Hmm.
boat wash, and which I think is a absolutely a great idea. But one of the
I
comments
think
that
that went to Great Slave Lake, didn't it?
um, I'm not sure.
I know there was one CD3 station that went up in the
Okay.
Northwest. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just curious if, given that you had said Minnesota started decontamination stations, back in the 90s, maybe, if I'm correct there, um,
2011.
2011. Okay.
Yep.
What other advice would you give to these organizations that are starting to develop this more or expanding it more, based on some of the learnings that, you've seen happen?
Sure. Well, consistent messaging is absolutely critical. And I mentioned that the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers, the cornerstone of that is the recreational activities, and the guidance that they provide to make sure that they're always cleaning, they're draining, they're drying, hopefully disposing of their bait properly. Again, definitely need to do better, in reaching those audiences so they're not disposing of their minnows or their worms either in the water or on the shore, which here in Minnesota is considered wanton waste. So we advocate them to dispose of it in the trash, even if there isn't a trash can at the water accesses, they can dispose of it in the trash when they get back home. So consistency in the messages is definitely important. Partnerships are absolutely critical, to make it a driving force. And also through the partnerships, then the different entities are all also providing consistency. And there's always strength in groups and numbers.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so much learning that we can do from each other. And um, yeah. I just want to chime in again. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or anything else to say on this topic?
Any questions on prevention? Be happy to answer them. And talk about early detection, monitoring. What has been key in Minnesota too is that Minnesota was the first state in the nation that made it illegal to transport prohibited species and aquatic plants on a public road. So policy has definitely been an important cornerstone in all of this.
And when was that, Doug?
It was in 1991 when the program was authorized by the Minnesota legislature. And in 1992, there were 12 watercraft inspectors that were hired. In 1993, there were 22 watercraft inspectors.
Mhm.
This last summer, our watercraft inspection trainers trained at least 856 watercraft inspectors in the state of Minnesota. We will likely be the number one, both in the number of inspectors and the number of inspections in the United States, edging out once again Colorado.
Mm.
Last year, Colorado just beat us by a few thousand in terms of overall inspections, but we had more inspectors.
Mm.
So we got a little contest going here.
I would be curious if you want to chat a bit more about monitoring and how with resources, how different monitoring areas are prioritized and what generally the focus is on for that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I started the first volunteer monitoring program in Minnesota back in the early 2000s and then handed off to the DNR.
Mm.
And for several different reasons, the program kind of languished. We were up to about 225 volunteers. And the focus of the program was on zoo mussels and had two aspects to it. We asked volunteers to, when they were just out strolling along the shores, looking at riprap, report presence and absence of adult zoo mussels they saw. And if they really wanted to invest more time and effort and money into it, they could also take water samples using a zooplankton net. And then those samples were sent to a contractor for presence and absence of zoo mussel villagers. What we've seen through that effort is, first of all, what the purpose of it was to really provide a conduit for information about aquatic invasive species to lakeshore property owners and other organizations. but also provide valuable data in terms of presence absence. And what we've seen is because of awareness has gone up, we've seen both an increase in reporting. So that's one aspect of it, but we're also seeing a change in the time until an infestation is found. And we can easily see that through Z mussel infestations by the number of year classes that are found upon the time in which they're there. So if there's 3 year classes, we can pretty much surmise that they've been there for 3 seasons or 3 years ago. And we're seeing that time till detection decrease from roughly about 5 years to maybe 2 or 3. And there's not a lot of data on this. It's mostly just anecdotal observation on my part.
Hmm.
But early detection and rapid response is very important. So in terms of detection, Megan Weber with Mazurk and Extension has a early detection program in which we partner with the DNR for training for identification of aquatic plants. They also have Starry Trek, which is the second Saturday in August here in Minnesota, and they've had volunteers going out across the state, and through that volunteer program, they have detected several aquatic invasive species and also detected new infestations of starry stonewort. For those that don't know what starry stonewort is, it's a invasive macroalgae that forms dense mats up to 10 feet thick in shallow waters of lakes. And so there's a lot of studies going on in terms of the ecological impacts at the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center under the direction of Dan Larkin. So yes,
Yeah.
early detection and rapid response is very important.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's great to have community involvement because that is
Hmm.
both for education purposes, but also to gather information and be able to, you know, respond quickly.
Yep. And many of the counties are also doing early detection and rapid response as well. So it kind of varies from county to county based on the amount of funding that they have available. If they have sufficient funding, that's kind of an add-on sort of thing that they have, but it is valuable where they're able to support it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And we have 63 counties that have watercraft inspection programs because of the prevention aid, and 32 counties also have local grant programs.
Okay.
So lake associations can apply to them to get funding, and that allows also the growth in partnerships.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, thanks, Doug. Do you have any other things that you would want to add to anyone who's curious about, what else to focus on with AIS prevention and anything else you want to
Well,
share?
if there's members of organizations that are interested in doing public outreach, that's something else that we can talk about. And again, getting back to those different audiences, I believe that public outreach at events like water festivals and fairs are also a good way to engage with people because you're going out to them, which they greatly appreciate. And having giveaways to emphasize the message is really important to draw people in and to give them items that have durable messages. And what I mean by durable messages is it's something that they'll have repeat exposure to. So things like can koozies and key floats and stickers that go on winch posts, all those things carry durable messages because they're seen often repeatedly by the anglers based on where they put them.
Hmm.
We have had people come into our booth at the Duluth Boat Sports and Travel Show saying, I lost my koozie. Can I get a new one? I even had one go so far as he asked me to sign his koozie.
You're famous.
Well, not that famous, but he evidently thought so.
The AIS world, yeah. No, that's a great idea. I agree, having physical reminders and things that you're seeing all the time to really drill in messaging for what the general public can remember
Yep.
is an awesome idea.
Yeah, I recently put together a PowerPoint presentation on how to do extension-based outreach through an AIS lens. to help train, county programs on how to do that because they're just like me when I started out. I started out, with the classic natural resource biology degree from the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I was thrown into this world of extension without really any training. Well, a lot of my colleagues did the same thing, and there's a lot of new people that are out there that have never been taught how to do extension programming.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's a whole different way of doing non-formal education.
Mhm. Yeah, very social based.
Yep. Another thing that I would recommend is that whatever you do, try to evaluate. I'm a very strong proponent of evaluation. Try to evaluate whether the work that you're doing is making a difference. And
Mm-hmm.
my master's is in program evaluation. So when I hear somebody say, well, we can't evaluate that or it's too expensive to evaluate that, that's nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. You can evaluate anything, either quantitatively, or using a hybrid approach. And it doesn't have to be expensive. But if you plan it from the very beginning of your program and evaluate it over time, it's much easier to do it that way and it's much less expensive as well.
Yeah, and clearly from the results that you've been sharing, like there's a lot of great indication that what you're doing is working and where to go from there, and that's really important data to have.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy when we did that first survey back in 1994. It was the first time I'd done any kind of evaluation at all. Worked with the University of Minnesota Survey Center, Research Center, and so I learned a tremendous amount how to develop surveys, develop questions, develop the survey logic. So you're asking questions that have the least amount of bias. And it was
Mhm.
remarkable that back then it was already 70% of the voters said they're willing to take action. That's after 3 years of implementation in the state of Minnesota. As I mentioned earlier, the program started in 1991. So I started giving presentations across the nation about this. And I had a colleague from Texas stand up and he says, well, Mr. Jensen, that may be all great in the Great Lakes because we just had Great Lakes data, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Ohio. He says, but how do you know that that's going to work in other parts of the nation? So that inspired me to then go after a grant and did the second survey based on the first survey and did the survey in Minnesota, Ohio, so that we had longitudinal data for both of those states, Vermont, Kansas, and California. And we uh, worked with those partners in those states because they had interest in evaluating their programs. Unfortunately, Texas was not interested at the time.
Mhm.
So then we saw that 20% increase to 90%, and we knew we were onto something. And then that inspired the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign because I was able to show that awareness and behavior change was possible.
Mhm.
But we need to have a sort of the rallying cry of one national campaign to get that message out.
Right.
And again, that was launched in 2002. We launched it in Minnesota in 2005. And the rest is history, as they say.
Mhm. Well, that's amazing work, Doug, that clearly you've been doing for a big portion of your career. And yeah, I'm really grateful that you've shared this knowledge with us today. I think we're almost at the top of the hour, so we'll wrap it up, but you can see Doug's email there, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions because he is a wealth of knowledge in the AIS world.
Well, I'm
So
grateful
again,
for being here. Thank you so much.
thanks, Doug, and thanks to everyone who has joined us this afternoon. And for anyone watching, thanks for tuning in. Just a reminder, this session is recorded, so you can find it on our website at lowwsf.com/ask-an-expert. We have one final webinar in this series. It's next week, Tuesday, on December 2nd, I believe. Yes, at 1 p.m. Central Time, titled Algae and Ice, Exploring the Science and Story, with Andrew Budziak from the Canadian Geographical Society and Andrew Bramberger from Environment Climate Change. I'm very excited about that one, as with the rest of them. So thanks again, everyone. Take care and hopefully see you at the next session.